Hi everyone, my name's Anne-Marie and I'd like to introduce you to my very first set of rubber stamps. The seasonal cluster rubber stamps. There's 12 in the collection and they're going to see you through the year of rubber stamping from Valentine's Day right through to Happy New Year, including St Patrick's Day and Halloween, Father's Day, Mother's Day and the 4 seasons. If you keep watching this video, you're going to see them up close and personal, and you're going to see the samples, or some of the samples that I've made with using them. Now, I've also got a brand new website as well, www.annemarievaux.com. You can see it on screen there. And if you go there, there's lots of how-to guides about how to rubber stamp, how to use heat embossing powder, etc. This year is going to be a very exciting year. We're going to have a great creative journey, and I just want you to have fun using my items. The first thing I just want to sort of say as well, when you get your stamps, don't put me in a box and think you can only use me with me. I want you to use my products with whatever you have. Whatever you have in your stash, let's be creative. Because you know what, I don't want boxing up and saying, that's Anne-Marie's, I can only use Anne-Marie with Anne-Marie. Because I know versatility, I enjoy using different products with different things, mixing and matching, and that's what it's all about. So please sit back, relax, and have a look at the full collection of the seasonal cluster rubber stamp. This is my first ever designed rubber stamp collection. It's called Seasonal Clusters, and they're going to take you through a year of stamping. Now, there's many occasions and some occasions in here that seem to have been forgotten about for us crafters, for things that we need to use and we want to make cards for, or scrapbooking pages or journaling. And when I designed them, I was thinking of card making, I was thinking of journaling. And you know what? They just work. They work so well. They're very versatile. They will all work together or they'll work individually. Now I'm going to run through the packs that there is. There's 12 in the collection. They're going to take you through the year of the different occasions, and then I want to show you how they work either separately or together. So the first one we have is spring. In every packet that I've designed, we've got the word, so in this case it's spring. We've got the cluster behind it. We've got a plain cluster without the words. We've got small clusters. Then we've got a frame and a border. Some of the borders work downwards, some work vertically, some work across, some work horizontally, some work both ways. So it's just the case of you can use them all in different ways. So this is spring, and this is how it looks when it's been stamped. Next, we have summer. Summer with the butterflies and the clusters behind. Again, with the border and the frame and the extra butterflies for the smaller clusters. Next, we have autumn. Autumn again with the border and the frame and the different shapes of leaves. It's just, they're just so good for card making and journaling and scrapbooking and so many of your paper projects. So this is winter. So we've got the winter with the snowflakes and the cluster behind the word winter, and the clusters on its own with the frames, with the border, and then the extra clusters for making corners, for creating backgrounds. So then we start through the year. The next is Valentine's Day. So we've got all the gorgeous hearts, both solid coloured hearts and open hearts. Again, for the clusters, for the backgrounds, with the words, for the frame and then the border. Next, we have St Patrick's Day. Something a little bit different for you. Again, with the clusters for the shamrocks, for the border, for the frame, and then the individual ones. Next, we have Easter, and again with open eggs that you could colour with the solid coloured eggs, with the frame, the border, and the egg cluster. So many different ways to use these, I promise you. You are going to absolutely love them. Mother's Day. We've got Mother's Day surrounded by a cluster. We've got the cluster background, the cluster frame, and then the cluster border with the extra clusters of the flowers. Next, Father's Day with the gorgeous cogs. And we've got the cogs in the border along the frame. For the background cogs, we've got large cogs and then the full sentiment as well. Something a little bit different for your Father's Day cards. Then we have Halloween. So we've got all those gorgeous pumpkins, borders, the frame, the words with the sentiment and the cluster, and then the cluster for your backgrounds, and then the larger pumpkins. Then we've got Christmas, and the Christmas ones with the holly, with the frame and the border, and then the holly clusters. And then finally, we've got Happy New Year with the gorgeous balloons, and again with the border, the frame, the balloons in the cluster to make your background papers, and it just all looks so good. Now when you get your stamps, they will be packaged like this under the Sweet Dixie label from Personal Impressions, and there's me on the back, my name. So please be sure to check me out because there's going to be so many tutorials with these stamps. Now I just want to quickly show you a few examples going through the range that I've been making. So we're going to start with spring, and I'm just going to go back to the boards to show you the different stamps with the samples. So we've got the spring, and I've just used it with plain black and white stamping. I've added some colour and a background dye, and I've used the cluster just to make the corners on the card. I've used sparkle embossing powder from Personal Impressions just to give it the edge for the spring. Then we can go to summer, and I've just used it with black ink, and I've die cut some butterflies, and then I've overstamped onto the butterflies. I've used the sentiment just as the main focal point, just with an image and a background die cut, and then on the background I've used white embossing powder just to create a simple background. I've used it with my inks and embossing folders just as the main image onto a card, and then I've stamped the word summer and die cut a circle to create a frame-like card. Next we have autumn. So again, using autumn colours, I've stamped a tag. I've made my own washi tape using some of the leaf stamps. I've used the leaves on the background, and I've just added a few die cuts. I've stenciled on this one on the background and then inked the edges and just used the main autumn stamp, and then carried on the stamping with the extra clusters towards the edge of the card, and then overstamped into the centre. I've used the border stamps to create a collage effect on the front of this card, and then again the border stamps through the centre just with the word autumn, and then the background stamps for the top of the card. So there's so many uses. And then the last autumn card, I've stamped the background and heat embossed it with different colours of autumnal embossing powder in the oranges and the greens and the golds. And then I've die cut some leaves. I've layered up the actual stamps together and added a ribbon. So that's our autumn collection. Next, our winter collection. I've stamped and heat embossed to create a shaker card front and just added it to a card. I've created an extra long card showing how we can use the actual background of the cluster stamps just to keep stamping and elongate that sentence, that sentiment in the middle. Whatever you use, it doesn't have to be the winter ones. And then I've also just used it as the front for a Christmas card and just added a vintage image and some snowflakes I've die cut. I've stamped the background with the cluster stamps and heat embossed it with silver. So that's the winter, and I must show you this one because I've used all 4 of the seasons for this card, and I've just simply used an ink pad on the square of the card underneath, and then using black permanent ink I've stamped spring, summer, autumn, winter, and then mounted it onto a large card. And I think that just looks good enough to be framed, does that one. It's something very different. So, but think outside the box with them. Think, just because I've used spring, summer, autumn, winter, you could use Valentine's Day. You could use St. Patrick's Day, whichever you wanted to use. So next we've got Valentine's Day. So for this card, I've stamped just the centre with the sentiment stamp, Valentine's Day, and I've stamped it and then heat embossed it with red Personal Impressions embossing powder, and it just looks so pretty. I've used an embossed layer on the front and just mounted it to a card. I've created an easel card and I've simply stamped a heart with Valentine's Day, stamped extra hearts onto surfaces, folded them, and then added the actual stopper with the little hearts that are the extra clusters. And for this one, for Valentine's Day, I've simply stamped the extra hearts in a row and then the borders underneath the frame and the sentiment, and I've cut away the outside of the hearts from the sentiment. So very, very versatile. Next we've got St. Patrick's Day. So St. Patrick's Day, this is a very easy one. I've layered some green cardstock onto a card and then matte and layered black cardstock, and on the front of the card I've stenciled and I've inked it with some very pale green distress ink, and then with black permanent ink I have simply stamped over the top, and it looks really effective. The next one for St. Patrick's Day is all in the green cardstock, and I've stamped and layered the border stamps over the top of the frame stamp and then the sentiment cluster stamp in the centre, and I've used the green Personal Impressions heat embossed powder. And then the last St. Patrick's Day card, I've simply stamped and heat embossed in white onto green cardstock. I've used the border stamps just to create the 4 corners and added some ribbon. So next we've got Easter. Now Easter, I've stamped the Easter eggs to one side. I've cut it out as it is. I've used 2 of the border Easter egg stamps. I've stamped the border stamp twice and then just used the background cluster on the background of that card. Next, we've got the frame, the border and the sentiment cut out and heat embossed with a copper embossing powder and just layered up on top of die cuts with a vintage image. Then we have Easter that's just been heat embossed with a gorgeous tanzanite blue embossing powder. I've added a bow onto a background image, and they're just so versatile. Wait till you see the journaling pages. Next we've got Mother's Day. So on Mother's Day, I've simply used the border stamp for the background. I've stamped it 5-6 times, and twice more for the centre. I've used the frame stamp and the sentiment. I've cut away the background from the sentiment and just used the actual sentiment itself. Next, I've made a Mother's Day easel card, just very plain, very quick, showing you how versatile and how you can use repeat stamping to just stamp the sentiment and then use the remainder of the cluster stamps to build up that image. This Mother's Day card is very ornate. I've stamped the background, I've heat embossed it and I've inked it. I've created 2 rosettes. I've used the Tim Holtz rosette die, and after I've die cut it, I've stamped it using the background Mother's Day cluster stamped, and then I've inked it. I've inked 2 of the border stamps and then the full sentiment stamp, and I've coloured in the flowers and then just added it all together, and it just looks so yummy. Next, quite a simple Mother's Day card. I've inked the background in 4 colours. I've stamped the frame and the Mother's Day sentiment cluster, and then I've re-stamped the Mother's Day cluster just for the sentiment that you can see there. I've coloured the sentiment with the same inks that I've used for the background. And those are the Mother's Day cards. Next we have Father's Day. So now Father's Day cards, I think, can sometimes be very difficult. So this is a simple black and white grey card. All I've done is added a spotted black and white background from my stash. I've inked and made my own background using a grey ink using the large cog. I've stamped twice the background, the border stamp, and then I've stamped the frame, the border and the cluster, the full word cluster for the front, and I've built up those layers and it just all works so well. Next, I have just a tiny Father's Day card, and all I've done is I've repeatedly stamped the border to create a background. So I've used this stamp and I've just repeat stamped it to create a border. And then I've used the sentiment in the middle. I've die cut just a rectangle, and I've cut out the frame and just mounted them together. And the last Father's Day card, I've used craft card. I've die cut some tags. One of them I've actually stamped the sentiment through the centre, and then the second one I've used the background cluster stamp and then built up the actual stamping on it. I've repeat stamped down the centre, and then the 2 large cogs I've made kind of like stoppers for the tags. And then I've die cut the background and I've added the image of the old car. So those are our Father's Day cards. Next we have Halloween. So I think the Halloween ones, I think these are really cool, and this is kind of like where it kicks in for journaling. They're all superb for journaling, but Halloween is just like, if you're going to make a scrapbook page or a journal page, do it for Halloween. So all I've done for this card is I've die cut 2 cobwebs from a die that I already had. I've got a vintage image, I've stamped Halloween, and I've heat embossed it with an orange embossing powder. And you can just see that, and I've ripped and torn it around the edge. Our second card, I've die cut a frame in black using a burnt orange background, and then I've stamped the border and I've just added that so it looks like it's coming out from the side of the frame. I've stamped the middle with our sentiment and used the repeat stamps, the extra clusters, just to make it look like I've stamped all of it. And I've added 2 large pumpkins at the top. And our last one, and I really love this card. This is so gorgeous and such a great technique. I've stamped the background with a perfect medium ink pad, and then I've heat embossed it with white. And then I've just added a touch of colour to the pumpkins. I've used the border frame stamp to stamp twice. I've used the actual... I'm getting my words to... I'm so excited about these, you can tell. So I've used the border stamp twice. I've used the frame stamp, and then I've used the sentiment stamp. And then I've heat embossed it with black embossing powder. And then I've just added a touch of colour to it. You can see how gorgeous it looks. So those are our Halloween samples. Next, Christmas. So I think, well, I truly love my Christmas samples. I just think they're so pretty. So this one, all I've done is I've used the border stamp on the back. I've stamped it twice. I've matte and laid cardstock on the back of the card, and then I've used the border stamp, and then I've stamped the Christmas stamp, and I've used 2 colours of heat embossing powder, and then I've just stamped the holly one more time and put it on over the bow. Next, I've used one of the Sweet Dixie dies for the background. I've made some poinsettias, and I've just stamped in the centre the word Christmas, and then I've used the extra holly just on the background of the actual frame. And then our last Christmas card, I've used the holly cluster for the background, and then I've made more clusters in gold on white rather than the self colour and clear embossing powder for the background. I've used the border stamp twice, and then I've used the frame stamp and the border stamp again, and then the full sentiment stamp, and layered everything up. Last but not least, we have the New Year. And what a happy New Year it's going to be if you send somebody one of these cards. So this is really simple. I have stamped just on one side of the card, and I've built up an image at the other side, and then I've added the extra stamping from the border just to make it look like I've added a little bit of my own tape on there. It makes it look like you've made washi tape just to hold that image in place. This, I think, is one of my favourite cards. Very, very simple to create. I've matte and laid some gold cardstock onto a card base. I've stamped the balloon cluster from the New Year's set on one side of the cardstock. And then on the other side, I've built up some layers with a die cut. I've used the frame stamp underneath the sentiment stamp, and I've embossed it all in gold heat embossing powder. And last but not least, for the cards, this is really a quick card. I've stencilled onto the background of a piece of card that I've matte and laid onto a black cardstock, and then I have simply, in black ink, I've stamped on the front of the card, Happy New Year. So those are all our card samples. I must just show you a couple of extra ideas. I know this is a long one, but I want to show you all my samples before they get down to the studio, and after then we can start creating some gorgeous tutorials. So when you use the cluster stamps to make backgrounds, you can make backgrounds by just repeat stamping. So this is the spring, summer, autumn, winter, Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, Mother's Day, Easter, Father's Day, Halloween, Christmas, and Happy New Year. Now I've stamped them all in a pale grey, but you would be able to stamp any colour that you like. I also want to show you journaling pages. Now these are blank journaling pages ready for you to decorate, so this means you could stamp yours like this. So I've stamped spring, the sentiment and the cluster stamp on its own, summer, autumn, winter, Valentine's Day, St Patrick's Day, Mother's Day, Easter, Father's Day, Halloween, Christmas and Happy New Year. So you could do that with all of the stamps and make yourself a 12-page journal covering some of the main parts of your year. And this is how they would look if you do journal them, and using them in different ways. So I've used the summer frame stamp to create a journaling panel for me to write into. I've added some of the butterflies from the summer set and just the word summer from the sentiment for that journaling page. For this journaling page, I've used the Valentine's stamp set, even though it's a wedding journal page. I've stamped onto the background with the hearts from the clusters, and then I've made my own washi tape from using the border strip, and then I've used the frame strip just to fill in some journaling. And then lastly, I've used the Christmas stamps to make a Christmas page. So we've got the word Christmas on the base of the journaling page. And then again, I've used the frame to create the journaling panel. I've added an extra of the border stamp in 2 places. And it just all kind of works together. And don't be afraid just to use them for whatever you want to use them for. They will work and they are so versatile. And I just hope you love them as much as I do. So coming up will be lots of tutorials showing you how to use them. I'm going to start off by showing you how to rubber stamp and how to heat emboss. And then we will start covering tutorials of what you can actually do with them and the different things that you can create and how they look. So please sit back and enjoy the ride, because I know it's going to be great. I know you're going to love these, and I just want to say thank you. That's what I'm trying to say. So join me on Facebook and have a look at my blog and the website for the different tutorials that there's going to be. Thank you for sitting through. I know it's 26 minutes of looking through the stamps, but I wanted to show you the samples before they go to the TV studio, just to show you the kinds of things that you can create with them. And I look forward to hearing from you. It's very exciting. So I just want to say thank you so much for watching, and I shall see you next time.